All right, so you're thinking about diving into the world of Proxmox in 2025, huh? That's awesome. But I gotta tell you, picking the right CPU for your server can feel like a battlefield out there.
Oh, absolutely. Especially with these two giants, Intel and AMD, constantly going head to head. It's a tough choice for anyone building a Proxmox server.
Yeah, you've got spec sheets and benchmarks coming at you from all sides, and it's like, where do you even begin?
It can be overwhelming for sure. But that's why we're here to break it all down, help you figure out what matters most, and make that decision a little less daunting.
Totally. So let's start from, well, I mean, we could talk about everything, right? GPUs, motherboards, the whole nine yards.
Oh, we could go on for days.
But let's focus on the heart of the server for this deep dive, the CPU. And no NVIDIA today, okay?
Hmm.
We talked way too much about them last time.
Uh-huh. All right, all right. I get it. Back to the CPU battleground.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, it's not just about the latest and greatest specs, right? It's about understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each platform and how they play out specifically in a Proxmox environment.
Absolutely. What works for a gaming PC might not be the best for a server running virtual machines, you know?
Totally. So let's talk about this CPU fight, the king's fight in history, Intel versus AMD. I mean, it's been going on forever, right?
Oh, yeah. This rivalry goes way back. I mean, for decades, Intel was basically the undisputed king of the server world. They had the stability, the compatibility. Everyone knew Intel.
Right, rock solid, just worked.
Exactly. But then, AMD decided to shake things up big time. They came out with their Ryzen and EPYC processors, and suddenly it was a whole new game.
Yeah, those Ryzen CPUs, they really made a splash.
They did. More cores, better performance, and multi-threaded tasks, and often at a lower price, really put the pressure on Intel.
So it's like David versus Goliath, but in the world of silicon.
Uh-huh, pretty much. And the best part is that this intense competition has been pushing both companies to innovate like crazy.
Which is great for us, right? I mean, as users, we get to benefit from all that progress.
Absolutely. We have more choices now, better performing CPUs. It's a good time to be building a server.
Okay, enough history for now. Let's get into the present-day battlefield. What are Intel's biggest strengths in the Proxmox arena right now? What are they bringing to the table?
Well, one of Intel's major advantages is their quick-sync video technology.
QuickSync, yeah, I've heard of that. It's for video stuff, right?
Exactly. It's an integrated GPU feature that can handle a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to video processing. So, if you're planning to use your Proxmox server for media-heavy tasks like running a Plex server or doing video transcoding,
Oh, right, for like streaming movies and stuff?
yeah, things like that, QuickSync can be a huge performance boost. It takes the load off your CPU, lets it focus on other things.
So smoother streaming, faster transcoding, and my CPU isn't bogged down.
Exactly. And that means your VMs can run more smoothly too, since the CPU isn't juggling so many tasks.
Okay, so if someone's a serious movie buff or, wants to host their own family photo library, Intel and QuickSync could be a real game changer.
Absolutely. It's a big win for media enthusiasts.
Okay, that's QuickSync. What else does Intel have going for it in the Proxmox world?
Well, another big thing is their mature ecosystem.
Mature ecosystem. What does that even mean?
Basically, it means they've been around forever. They have a huge install base, tons of software is optimized for Intel, and they've had years to work out the kinks.
So it's like less chance of running into weird driver issues or compatibility problems.
Exactly. Things just tend to work smoothly with Intel. It's that peace of mind factor.
I get that, especially if you're not like a hardcore techie who loves troubleshooting. You just
Yeah.
want things to work.
Exactly. Reliability is a big deal.
Mm.
And finally, Intel CPUs often have an edge when it comes to single-threaded performance.
Single thread. Okay, so that means how fast a single core of the CPU can run.
Right. And some applications like certain types of simulations or financial modeling, they really rely on that single core speed. It's like having a super fast sprinter on your team.
Okay, so for those specific tasks, Intel might have the edge, but you said often. So I'm guessing there are situations where single-threaded performance isn't the most important factor.
Right. And that's where things get interesting with AMD.
Okay, I was just about to ask about AMD. We've covered Intel's strengths, but like any good rivalry, there are two sides to this story. So what makes AMD a serious contender in the Proxmox world?
Well, one of their biggest advantages is core count. AMD CPUs often pack in more cores for the same price as Intel. And in a virtualization environment where you're running multiple VMs, well, more cores are a good thing.
So it's like having a bigger team to handle all those VMs, right? More workers to get the job done.
Exactly. And that can make a big difference in performance, especially if you're running a lot of VMs simultaneously.
Okay, more cores, got it. Anything else that makes AMD stand out?
Oh, yeah. AMD is also known for their support of ECC memory.
ECC memory. Now, remind me what that is again. It's been a while.
Sure. ECC stands for Error Correcting Code. It's basically a type of RAM that can detect and correct certain types of errors on the fly.
Okay, so it's like having a spell checker for your RAM.
Yeah, kind of. It helps prevent data corruption, improve stability, and it's really important for servers that need to be super reliable.
Right, because if you're running a business or something, you don't want your server crashing because of a RAM error.
Absolutely. Reliability is key. And speaking of performance, AMD CPUs also tend to shine when it comes to multi-threaded workloads.
Multi-threaded, so that's the opposite of single-threaded, right?
Yeah, basically. Multi-threaded tasks can be split up and run across multiple cores, which is a common scenario in virtualization. You have multiple VMs all doing their thing at the same time.
So it's like having a team of workers who can all pitch in and share the load, rather than relying on one superstar to do everything.
I like that analogy. And another thing I'd highlight about AMD's architecture is that it's often simpler than what Intel is doing these days.
Simpler. How so?
Well, Intel has moved to this big little architecture with their CPUs. They have P cores for performance and E cores for efficiency, and it can get a bit complex in a virtualization environment.
Right, because your VMs might end up bouncing between these different core types, and that could cause unpredictable performance, right?
Yeah, exactly. AMD, on the other hand, the architecture is more straightforward. All the cores are basically the same, which can make things easier to manage.
Okay, so simplicity is another point in AMD's favor.
Yeah,
But I have a feeling there's a but coming, right? No technology is perfect.
you're right. Every technology has its trade-offs.
So what are AMD's weaknesses? Where do they fall short?
Well, one area where they've traditionally lagged behind Intel is integrated graphics. While AMD's Ryzen CPUs with integrated graphics are decent for everyday tasks, they're not as powerful as Intel's QuickSync for demanding media workloads.
So if you're planning to build a Proxmox server that doubles as a media transcoding beast, Intel might still be the way to go.
Right. And while it's less of an issue now than it used to be, there's also the matter of software optimization.
Software optimization, what do you mean by that?
Well, some niche applications or legacy software might still run better on Intel hardware simply because Intel has been the dominant player for so long, and developers have had more time to optimize for that platform.
So it's like a matter of history and momentum. Intel's been the big name for so long that some software hasn't fully caught up with AMD's rise.
Right, but I'd say AMD has been closing that gap rapidly. They're making great strides in software compatibility.
Okay, so we've got a good sense of the strengths and weaknesses of both Intel and AMD. We've got QuickSync on one side, core count on the other. It's a real back and forth. But now, the big question, how do we actually choose the right CPU for our Proxmox server?
That's where things get really interesting. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. The best CPU for you will depend on your specific needs, your budget, and how you plan to use your Proxmox server.
Okay, so let's turn this into a conversation with you, our listener.
Yeah.
Imagine we're sitting down with you, trying to figure out what's going to work best for your situation.
Exactly. Let's make this personal.
So the first question we'd ask you is, what are you planning to do with your Proxmox server? What's your primary workload going to be? Are you going to be running tons of virtual machines? Are you going to be doing heavy video editing? Or are you focusing on something else entirely?
Yeah, that's the starting point. Figure out what you need your server to do, and then we can start narrowing down the CPU choices.
Right, because a CPU that's great for running a bunch of VMs might not be the best choice for a media server, and vice versa.
Exactly. It's all about matching the CPU to the task.
Okay, so workload is key. What other factors should we be considering?
Well, another big one is expandability. Think about how important it is to be able to add more components to your server down the road. Will you need more PCIe lanes for adding things like GPUs, NVMe drives, or network cards?
Right, because if you're planning to grow your server over time, you don't want to hit a roadblock because you're out of PCIe lanes.
Exactly. So think about your future needs, not just your current ones.
Okay, workload, expandability, got it. What else?
Well, of course, there's always the budget. CPUs can range in price from a few $100s to several thousand, so it's important to set a realistic budget before you start shopping.
Yeah, you don't want to fall in love with a CPU and then realize it's way out of your price range.
Right. But the good news is that both Intel and AMD offer great CPUs at various price points, so you should be able to find something that fits your needs and your wallet.
That's good to hear. I remember feeling a bit intimidated by the prices when I first started looking at server hardware.
It can be a bit of a sticker shock, but you don't have to break the bank to get a solid Proxmox server.
Okay, so we've got workload, expandability, and budget. Anything else we should be thinking about?
One more thing to consider is future-proofing. Technology moves incredibly fast, so it's worth thinking about whether you want a server that can keep up with those advancements. For example, are you planning to upgrade to DDR5 memory or PCIe 5.0 in the future? If so, you'll need to choose a CPU that supports those technologies.
So it's like thinking about whether you want to buy a car with the latest features, knowing that it might be outdated in a few years.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between getting the most out of your current budget and anticipating what your needs might be down the road.
Okay, so to recap, when choosing between Intel and AMD for your Proxmox server, the key questions to ask yourself are, what's my primary workload? How important is expandability? What's my budget? And how important is future-proofing?
Those are the big ones. Answer those questions, and you'll be well on your way to choosing the perfect CPU.
All right, so we've laid the groundwork, we've explored the battle between Intel and AMD, and we've got our listeners thinking about their specific needs. But now, the real fun begins. What are the specific CPUs we recommend for different use cases?
That's what we'll dive into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of specific CPU recommendations, whether you're a media enthusiast, a VM guru, or a budget-conscious builder.
I can't wait. This is where things get really exciting. Stay tuned, everyone. Welcome back to our Proxmox deep dive. In part one, we kind of laid the groundwork. We talked about the strengths and weaknesses of Intel and AMD CPUs, and we got you thinking about what you actually need in a server, like what are you going to use it for, what's your budget, all that good stuff.
Right, we got you thinking about your workload and expandability and future-proofing and all that.
Exactly. So now it's time to actually get down to brass tacks. Let's talk specific CPU recommendations. Like, imagine we're sitting down with you, our listener, helping you design the perfect Proxmox server.
Yeah, let's get into some real-world scenarios and give some tailored advice.
All right, so let's say our listener is a big-time movie buff. Right?
Yeah.
They have a huge media library. They want to stream to multiple devices, do some transcoding on the fly, and maybe run a basic VMs on the side, like for a home office or something.
All right, so a media server with a bit of virtualization on the side.
Exactly. What kind of CPU would make their Proxmox server a media streaming machine? What would you recommend?
Well, for that kind of setup, honestly, Intel with their quick sync video is still tough to beat.
Quick sync, yeah, that hardware acceleration is a game changer for video stuff, right?
It is. It takes so much load off the CPU, lets it focus on other things, and for media transcoding especially, it makes a huge difference.
Smoother streaming, faster transcoding. It's a win-win for media lovers.
Exactly. So I definitely lean towards Intel in this case.
Okay, so Intel for the media enthusiast. But which specific Intel CPU would you go for? There's so many to choose from.
Yeah, that's true. Well, a good starting point would be an Intel Core i5 processor, probably from the latest generation, something like a Core i5-14600K or a Core i5-14400.
Okay, so those are in the sweet spot of performance and affordability.
Yeah, they hit that sweet spot for sure. You get good performance for a reasonable price.
And what if our listener decides down the road that they need a bit more power?
Well, they could always upgrade to a Core i7 or even a Core i9, but honestly, for most media-focused Proxmox servers, a Core i5 will be plenty powerful.
All right, so we've got our media server CPU sorted. Now let's switch gears a little bit. Let's say our listener is all about those virtual machines.
Okay, the VM guru.
Yeah, they're building a Proxmox server to run a home lab with like a ton of VMs for testing, development, maybe even running a small business. What's the best CPU strategy there?
Well, for a VM-heavy workload like that, AMD is definitely the way to go. Their Ryzen CPUs, especially the Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 9 series, offer a ton of cores for the price, which is exactly what you want for running lots of VMs.
Right, because more cores equals more VMs running smoothly without slowing each other down.
Exactly. It's like having a bigger team to handle all those virtual machines.
Okay, so which specific AMD Ryzen CPUs would you recommend for a home lab setup?
Well, for a home lab, A Ryzen 700X or a Ryzen 7900X would be great choices.
Those are solid CPUs. Plenty of cores, good performance, and not too expensive.
Right. They hit that sweet spot.
But what if our listener is running a business on their Proxmox server and they need even more horsepower, like to support multiple employees all accessing the same VMs? Should they be looking at a different class of CPU?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If they're running a business and need that enterprise-grade power, they might want to step up to AMD's Threadripper CPUs.
Threadrippers, those are the big guns.
They are. Tons of cores, tons of performance, perfect for demanding workloads. And if they really need to go all in, they could even consider AMD's EPYC server processors.
EPYC, wow, those are serious.
Yeah, EPYC is the top of the line. They're designed specifically for heavy-duty virtualization and data center applications.
Okay, so we've got recommendations for media lovers, we've got recommendations for VM enthusiasts, but what about the budget-conscious folks out there?
Ah, yes, the budget builders. They're important too.
Exactly. What if someone's trying to get the most bang for their buck without sacrificing performance?
Well, the good news is that both Intel and AMD have some great options at the lower end of the price spectrum. It's just a matter of finding that sweet spot where you're getting enough power for your needs without overspending.
So it's not just about grabbing the cheapest CPU you can find.
Right. You want to make smart choices based on what you're actually going to be doing with the server.
Okay, so what are some specific CPUs you'd recommend for someone who's trying to stretch their budget?
Well, on the AMD side, the Ryzen 5 5600X is a real workhorse. It's a 6-core CPU that punches above its weight in terms of performance.
The 5600X, yeah, that's a popular one.
It is. And if you need a few more cores, the Ryzen 7 5700X is another great option in that price range.
Okay, those Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7 CPUs, they seem to be a popular choice for budget-minded builders. What about on the Intel side? Do they have any contenders in that arena?
Oh yeah, for sure. The Intel Core i5-13400 is a solid pick. It's a 10-core processor that offers a good balance of single-threaded and multi-threaded performance.
So even if you're on a tight budget, you don't have to settle for a wimpy CPU.
No, not at all. You can still get a really capable CPU without breaking the bank.
All right, so we've talked about CPUs for media servers, for VM-heavy setups, and for budget-conscious builds. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have, but remember, the CPU is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to building a Proxmox server.
Right. We also need to think about things like RAM, storage, networking, all that good stuff.
Exactly, and that's what we'll get into in the next part of our deep dive.
Oh yeah, we're going to dive deep into the other essential components of a Proxmox server.
Stay tuned! Welcome back to our Proxmox deep dive. We've spent the last 2 parts talking about CPUs, comparing Intel and AMD, figuring out which one is right for different use cases, all that good stuff.
Yeah, we've laid the foundation, we've picked our CPU, but now it's time to build the rest of the house, so to speak. Exactly. A Proxmox server is more than just a CPU, right? There's a whole ecosystem of features and capabilities that we can explore.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what we're going to dive into in this final part. We're going to unlock the true potential of your Proxmox server.
Okay, I'm excited. Where do we start?
Let's talk networking.
Networking. Okay. I know networking is important, but I'll admit it's always been a bit of a black box for me.
Yeah, it can be a bit intimidating, but it's really not that complicated once you break it down.
Okay, well, break it down for me. Why is networking so important in a Proxmox environment?
Well, think of it this way. Your Proxmox server is like a virtual city, right? You've got all these VMs running, these different services and applications all doing their thing.
Okay, yeah, I like that analogy.
And networking is like the roads and the infrastructure that connect everything in that city.
So if the networking is poorly designed, it's like having traffic jams all over the place.
Exactly. Things slow down, performance suffers, it's a mess. But with Proxmox, you have a lot of control over how that networking is set up. You can create isolated networks for different purposes, you can control traffic flow, you can even enhance security.
So instead of all my VMs being on one big crowded network, I can create separate lanes for different types of traffic.
Exactly. You could have a network for your web servers, another for your database servers, and yet another for your internal applications. This isolation not only makes things run smoother, but it also makes it much harder for a potential attacker to move around if one VM gets compromised.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like having security checkpoints at different points in the city.
Right. So yeah, networking is definitely something you want to spend some time thinking about when you're setting up your Proxmox server.
Okay, networking, check. What else should we be thinking about?
Storage.
Storage, right. Because our virtual machines need somewhere to live, right? They need disk space.
Exactly. And Proxmox offers a range of advanced storage options that go way beyond basic disk partitions.
Okay, like what? Give me some examples.
Well, have you heard of ZFS and Ceph?
ZFS, yeah, I've heard that name thrown around. But I'll be honest, it sounds a little intimidating.
It can be, yeah. But it's worth learning about because it's incredibly powerful. Think of ZFS as like a vault for your most valuable data.
A vault. Okay.
Yeah, it's a super robust file system known for its data integrity features and its ability to handle massive amounts of storage. If you're reading a business or storing sensitive information, ZFS is your best friend.
So ZFS is like Fort Knox for my data. Got
Mhm.
it. What about Ceph? What makes it special?
Ceph is all about scalability and resilience. It's a distributed storage system that lets you create a massive storage cluster across multiple servers. So if you're dealing with like petabytes of data and you need rock-solid reliability, Ceph is the way to go.
Okay, so if ZFS is Fort Knox, then Ceph is like having a whole network of interconnected vaults all working together to keep my data safe and accessible.
That's a great analogy.
I'm trying. All right, so we've got networking, we've got storage. What other Proxmox superpowers should we have in our toolkit? Backups. Backups, yes. Never underestimate the importance of backups.
Never. Especially in a virtualized environment where, things can go wrong. Proxmox has built-in tools that make it super easy to create snapshots of your VMs and containers. It's like taking a picture of your entire system so you can rewind to that point in time if something goes wrong.
Right. Backups are like an insurance policy for your data.
Exactly. And Proxmox makes it easy to automate those backups so you don't have to remember to do it manually. You can set it and forget it.
Okay, that's good to know. It's one less thing to worry about. Any other pro tips you want to share before we wrap things up?
Yeah, one more thing I'd mention is the Proxmox API.
API, that's application programming interface, right?
Yeah, right. And it basically lets you interact with your Proxmox server programmatically. So instead of manually clicking around in the web interface, you can write scripts or programs to automate tasks, monitor performance, integrate Proxmox with other systems, all sorts of cool stuff.
So it's like taking Proxmox to the next level, automating things, making it more efficient, more powerful.
Exactly. The API opens up a whole world of possibilities.
All right, so the key takeaway here is that Proxmox is a really powerful platform, but it also has a lot of depth. There's a lot to learn and explore.
That's right. And there's a huge community of Proxmox users out there who are always willing to help and share their knowledge. So don't be afraid to ask questions, experiment, and have fun.
Well said. This deep dive has been a blast. We've covered a lot of ground, from choosing the right CPU to unlocking the advanced features of Proxmox. I hope you've learned a lot, and I hope you're feeling inspired to build your own awesome Proxmox server.
Me too. It's been a fun journey.
All right, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening, everyone. Happy virtualizing.